I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Kizh, Chumash, and Tongva tribes, the traditional custodians of the land, Los Angeles, that this podcast is being recorded on, as well as paying my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome to episode 3 of this podcast series, The Future of Being a Musician. I'm Ben Lee. Thank you, everybody, once again for the amazing feedback about episode 2. It's so nice that pretty much everyone that listens to this is a musician, and this is a podcast that's made for our community. And with that in mind, there is no better guest than Sadie Dupuis, who is the guest for episode 3. You might know Sadie from Speedy Ortiz. She's also done solo albums under Sad 13, has put out 2 books of poetry, is a music journalist, also has a record label imprint called Wax 9, has collaborated with tons of people from Lizzo to the New Pornographers and even myself. She did production on Born for This Bullshit on my last album, I'm Fun. She's vegan and she's an activist in so many ways, as you're going to hear her discuss. She's really passionate about a lot of issues. But I kind of wanted to zoom in from some of the larger philosophical issues. Like, yes, she deals with these and deals with these amazingly. And we're going to talk about Amazon boycotts and streaming platforms and all of that. But the theme of this podcast to me and of Sadie's career in general is the phrase community first. She is really passionate about safe spaces, harm reduction in all aspects, and just generally she has a profound care and awareness for the community around her. She has a new album out in September, Speedy Ortiz album called Rabbit Rabbit, and at the end of this episode you will hear her new single, Plus One. Without further ado, here is the chat I had with my friend, collaborator, and I would call her a local hero, Sadie Dupuis. Sadie, thank you for joining me today.
Of course, Ben. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you too. So the purpose of this pod series is really about creating a space where musicians and people within the music biz can talk frankly about the challenges that we're facing, but also the goal is to sort of create some sort of dialogue that has a positive spin, in whether it's in terms of activism or business approaches, like ways musicians can think about their future, because that's not really laid out for us at the moment, you know, what the dream is exactly. And I wanted to start with this quote of yours. There are small... Yeah.
Always terrifying to hear your own words read back to you.
There are small concrete steps you can take to improve the community within music and outside it. There are so many ways to use the music industry for good. Let's build a better music scene. So I guess I just wanted to kind of
Where did I say that?
I'll look it up for you. I think you might have said it in Australia at Big Sound.
Oh, cool.
But I guess that's why I was inspired to talk to you, because I see you as someone that is really good about getting your hands dirty, whether it's in terms of running your business or as an activist or any of the causes you're passionate about. And what does that look like to you? Like, what are the things we can do to have a better music scene or a better music industry?
Yeah, I think that particular speech at Big Sound was about ways that I've been able to, or that I've seen others use their music to enact some kind of change. And I talked about when I was in high school, I made an album. That was my first album. Embarrassing music will never surface online, but I did use the profits of its sales to benefit families who had been displaced in Katrina. This is in the year 2005, 2006 is when I was working on this record. So it was like a realization that music could have this other purpose. Granted, I was a 17-year-old. I wasn't looking to make an income off a solo record. But I think just coming from different music scenes, different DIY scenes, different punk scenes, maybe you're playing to 10 people, but there's always some kind of community angle. So there were always different fundraisers to benefit people in the community or people outside of the community. It felt like supporting our neighbors and peers was always like very central to what was happening in these little punk scenes that I was in and out of.
But how did you come to that? Because for most people, when they get into music, they're mostly, people are mostly exposed to the mainstream paradigm of what success looks like. And then, like, for me, it was like Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, being a rock star in a limo down Sunset Strip. And that like imprinted on my brain. But then the awakening to the DIY scene and punk was like a process. Like, how did you come to that realization or that ethos?
I mean, that's not to say I didn't love huge mainstream things. But I started playing in bands like you. I was, a little teenager, 12 or 13. So it just, I never expected music to be my work. It was like a thing I did with friends and a thing I did to make other friends and a thing I did to support my friends who were playing. So I think a lot of the DIY ethos and community ethic was pretty ingrained in my thoughts about what music could and should be by the time I had any inkling that it was something I could make a living off of. So pretty like early on in Speedy, we were always saying no to things that I'm sure record label or manager or booking agent would have liked us to have said yes to, but it was, something that coming from these little basement scenes would have been so distasteful to us to be part of. So whether that was, I think one of the first things I can remember doing was finding out that Urban Outfitters had a ton of our records in stock and learning about the homophobic political donations of its founder. And
oh wow, I didn't know about that.
So we pulled all our stock from Urban Outfitters for many years until some remedies had been made there. It would always be like, you can play this festival stage and it's a crazy amount of money, but it's sponsored by a sneaker company that the labor practices are pretty well documented as abhorrent. So we would not be interested in doing something like that. So in some cases, it feels great to say no. I think maybe other people who've worked with us might have felt that was to our detriment, but it has not felt that way to us. So I think having that community first understanding of what playing in a band should be, and community in a wider sense, like part of humanity, it's easy to say no to things that feel connected to harming others.
Totally. But do you feel, is there an inherent privilege in,
definitely,
like, I look at, like, say, filmmakers, and most of the people that can afford to become filmmakers come from upper middle class and upwards socioeconomic families. So there's a little bit of a safety net. Like, how do you grapple with, say, because now you're like I am, you're sort of in a stage of your career where younger artists probably ask you questions and advice, and you've walked the path, so you now are in a position where you can also help others do that. But how do you grapple between the question of, like, the power of saying no and the privilege it sometimes requires to have the ability to say no?
100%. It requires a privilege to be able to say no, that I'm not counting on the $15,000 sneaker paycheck to make it work that month. And I think a real big component is that when this band, Speedy Ortiz, started to become successful, we all had other full-time jobs. So it really wasn't the only way to make ends meet. It was kind of an icing on top and a fun thing to do with friends and a way to see friends around the country and later more globally. And at this point, sometimes those paychecks would be really nice, but it's too deeply ingrained that it's not worth it. A few years ago, I was part of a musicians boycott of Amazon, in that we were pledging not to do, the demands weren't the demands on Amazon were crucial, I felt and still feel. Basically, musicians pledged not to do new exclusive work with Amazon while they still maintained contracts with ICE. Amazon technology was being used to basically surveil people and deport people. There's a million reasons you could avoid Amazon. The horrific labor conditions in their warehouses that result in people's deaths, which escalated drastically over the pandemic, just the horrible exploitation of workers, the union busting that has happened to so many of the organizers who are trying to fight for livable conditions for the workers, such as being able to use the bathroom. I mean, the horror stories you read about Amazon, people dying on warehouse floors and their coworkers having to continue their shifts with their dead friend on the floor. It's awful. So there's a million reasons to boycott Amazon. We asked musicians to pledge not to do exclusive content for Amazon while these, ICE CBP contracts were maintained. This is like Trump time. So you're seeing stories of families in literal cages, and that is directly a result of Amazon's contracts. So around this time, the reason we asked for no exclusive content is Amazon was kind of throwing out checks willy-nilly, we'll fund a music video to the tune of $20,000 if the artist brands it as Amazon. It just felt like this was one way musicians could voice support for the very real people whose lives were being devastated by Amazon's many awful practices. So a lot of people signed on to this. A lot of people wound up pulling their music from Amazon. And at the end of the day, we weren't calling out people who continued to work with Amazon because we understand that that is a paycheck that many people need. But I think it is fair and necessary for artists to decide where they're comfortable with that paycheck coming from. If it's $20,000 to do a music video and that it's 100% blood money, everybody's got to make that call. But
yeah, how do you make that call? Because all money, when you trace it back, is
all money's blood money. Yeah.
I mean, there's it's so funny because we were talking about using Twitter and Elon Musk and everything, and I was like, he's just the famous evil CEO. Yeah, most of these guys are not great guys, and we're using their products.
He's not really killing people based on his labor practices. So there is kind of a life or death line for me, at least.
Right. I'm curious about some of the other activism work you've done around the streaming stuff. And I was curious about what your feelings are about streaming and Spotify and how you position yourself as an artist who's got a new record coming out.
Sure. I started, this is my problem. I can't shut up. I started complaining about Spotify online however many years ago, and I would get so many hateful comments from other. I remember making some jokey tweet that when you thank Spotify for a playlist ad, it's essentially like thanking ExxonMobil for the privilege of paying them $60 to fill your tank. It's like, what are you thanking them for? You maybe got $20 out of this playlist ad. A bunch of people replied to me that I was somehow diminishing the dreams of smaller bands. I was like, no, I'm simply reflecting on how little actual income these I think I said this at a time when Speedy was the cover image of 4 Spotify playlists simultaneously. It's like, this really isn't translating to much of anything for us. I know, I'm sure a lot of musicians who are paying attention to their royalties just see how imbalanced the quantity of streams is with the real income that you maybe get out of it twice a year.
But let's dig into that for a second.
Yeah.
You were saying you didn't see any impact was it on your ticket sales also? Did you not feel you were building an audience by getting on playlists?
it's hard for me to know where people come from or how they found us. I'm not, sitting at the merch table being like, did you find us from Cool Women Tuesday? People will talk to me that they had a connection with a certain song, or I find a lot of people, we had a sync in a video game that is very meaningful to a lot of people. And I'd say like a third of the people I meet at a show are like, I found you through the Life is Strange soundtrack. I love that.
Was that the one? Was that the one where someone had like a book? It was like a teenage girl.
Yeah.
Oh, my stepdaughter was so into that. I didn't know. I never played it, but I remember her talking about it, and she loved all the music for it. So that is a great example of like she would have discovered you that way. Yeah.
Or I love hearing like, I heard you through my brother and we have this connection over a certain song. Those kinds of things are meaningful to me. I love hearing, I heard you on the radio. I love hearing that a college station was into a certain song and that's how someone found it.
You're certainly not an artist though that was like, Spotify playlists changed my career. It was just another thing going on. Yeah.
It's another thing going on, and kind of an anonymous thing for the people who are putting together those playlists. There's not really an...
are there people doing that? I didn't know if there was actually.
I think it depends on the playlist, but there are. Yeah. I believe there are editorial. Gotcha. I mean, I know because a lot of. If I back up a little further, I was a music journalist for a couple years before before I quickly realized it was too hard for me to freelance. Of course, now I'm back to that. A lot of my friends who were in editorial wound up doing editorial for these streaming companies and putting together playlists, or granted those jobs seem to evaporate and have little stability. We just look at all the podcast companies that Spotify acquired that they just gutted last week. So there are people part of it, but it's like, it's all under the monolith branding of the corporation. So it's not like I can say, I'll think of someone. Maura Johnston's a writer whose music taste I love, and if she recommends something, I'm frequently very excited to follow that. You're not really getting that kind of interpersonal connection by discovering things through the playlist ad. And now that there's all these other layers to it, the payola adjacent component where you can accept slightly lower royalties for the possible chance of prioritized playlisting.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know about that. Yeah. Okay, so that when you upload a new single or something, does it give you that option?
I believe it's just you have to opt for that for your entire. Wow. I'm lucky I don't have to do any of this stuff for us.
So how does what type of ethics or principles do you, as a label manager, like what do you try and implement in your community building through your label that you see sort of missing in the wider industry?
So my label is through Car Park, who have been Speedy's label for a long time. It's an imprint of Car Park and shares the same staff. So I will say that having worked with Car Park for, I guess 10 years at this point, I feel like we got really lucky because their contracts were very fair. I think it's given me a lot of perspective when friends are negotiating a contract for the first time, that I know what can be done and what can be standard. So they've always been very, not only fair, but supportive of these things that we feel strongly about. Like I remember, maybe back in 2013, a lot of artists on labels wouldn't put their whole thing up to stream on Bandcamp. It would be, you could have the singles up on Bandcamp, but you have to purchase it to hear the whole thing. And I remember feeling frustrated that paying for a subscription was the only way you could opt to hear music before deciding to purchase it. It felt to me that if we made the whole record available. This is like so funny now because this is the standard thing now, but a lot of labels wouldn't put the whole record on Bandcamp or any kind of streaming platform that wasn't these subscription models that pay you tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of pennies. And they were supportive of that, and they let us put the record up on Bandcamp to stream in full. They let us pull catalog from Urban Outfitters and from Amazon, ultimately, where we did pull catalog. So I think that working with Car Park, which is a small team, but they're very thoughtful and they work really hard. And I think they're in it for reasons I support, has taught me a lot about how to approach the artists on Wax 9. And also knowing, there's certainly things, less so in the ethical realm, but there are things that I've said yes to when we're touring or in a press cycle that I just wish someone had talked me through. So I'm happy to be able to offer some of that.
Can you give an example of one of those? I'd be curious.
I certainly exhausted myself for the first several years of touring because it felt like every single opportunity, and I'm going to put that in scare quotes, was something that we should latch onto because it may not happen, other than the ones that were morally dubious. We'd be doing radio session that morning, in-store that afternoon, and show that night, and then you got to drive overnight from Durham to Atlanta, and then you're completely exhausted, you're getting sick, you're not going to cancel a show because you're sick. You're also taking an interview, and the questions are a little intrusive, but you feel you have to be polite, so you just talk through them anyway. I think just having someone to bounce this stuff off of, to ask, is this normal, is this necessary, is really helpful.
Yeah, I remember talking to Billy Corgan at some point right after Smashing Pumpkins broke up the first time, and he just said the advice he never got was that it was okay to say no to things.
Yeah.
And particularly coming through the 90s where it just was it was like a gold rush for alternative music, and it did feel like, oh my God, you better take the ride now, or you never know when the door's going to open. And I think we all, artists are lucky actually to experience a moment like that where a door does open, but the inherent scarcity that a lot of us have as creative people that are just basically trying to make a living doing what we love, it is very hard. It's very hard to say no to things as opportunities.
And what I find even harder to say no to is when it is it's easier for me to say no to Amazon than it is to a 15-year-old's zine. I always want to support the people who are just starting out, and I always want to support the college stations because that's how I learned anything about music. But then sometimes I have to take a zoom out and think, if I do all of these things, I will not be able to do most of the rest.
Totally. So you have a higher sort of demand of sort of self-care as you go through the process now of promoting a record than you did in your 20s.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also that I remember our first couple records, we'd go on tour and not come home for 4 months. And if we were home for maybe 5 days, and then we're back out again. We don't
come back with no money. It was always you'd be gone for so long and come back with the same financials, or less.
Well, we would, we're still sleeping on people's couches and floors, so we do okay. But it's just not physically sustainable.
Can you tour though at a level that you're not losing money now? Because this is a bit of a taboo thing to talk about, but I think a lot of audiences don't realize that artists who are not in that top 1% have sort of been convinced that touring now is a promotional thing. It's crazy how many artists are not making money on tour, decent sized artists.
So we have only lost money on one tour ever. It was a big support tour fly-in situation where we had to rent backline. It's the only time we've ever lost money on a tour, which is great. But as you're saying, a lot of artists lose money on tour. That's because they're paying for things that we are so shy about pulling the trigger on. We'll stay at somebody's second cousin's place where it's one short couch and then floor space. And that's because the $150 you'd spend on a couple hotel rooms that night eats in every single day. So we tour very econo. As I'm turning 35 next month.
It's time.
Chronic pain. I got all these other things, but I'm also but we need to make an income if we're going to justify doing these things. So we've gotten more selective about what we'll do in terms of support tours. We don't do very many of them. And when we do, it's because it's someone we love and we're being compensated fairly.
Yeah, yeah.
Having been offered so many support tours that have embarrassingly low guarantees, we are trying to offer a fairer guarantee when we take out support, which also cuts into the profit at the end of the day. So, but it just feels like we have to raise that bar somehow, where support bands aren't being paid the $250 they were being paid 30 years ago.
Yeah, I've been saying to artists, if you're lucky enough to have some kind of safety net to invest in your career at the very beginning, do it for 2 years, the way anyone would with a small business. Like if people open a sandwich shop, they basically budget in 2 years of running at a loss before they would even expect to be profitable. And that's, within a capitalist system, that is sort of like a reasonable expectation of investment. But I think for artists to be 10 years deep, 15 years deep into their careers and losing money on things on the promise of exposure or whatever, it's a crazy just way of approaching something, and a non-sustainable way of approaching something you want to do forever.
Sure. Yeah. I think, again, this just speaks to having wound up randomly in a band anyone cared about. I was always in bands. I was always going to be in bands, but I never ever thought it would be the day job. And the only reason I decided it could be, I was teaching at a university, and granted, we all know that adjunct pay is fairly meager, but it was enough to live and also do other projects like touring. So I'd be teaching 3 days a week, and then I'd take a long weekend to do some touring with the band. And at some point, I want to say end of 2013, I realized that my income from the band was close to and a little bit more than my income from the teaching. And I was only, doing shows basically on weekends and on school vacations. So that was sort of what empowered us all to at that time quit our day jobs and try to dive into it full time.
Amazing. And so wait, I want to go back to the.
But this is because we sleep on like a warehouse floor.
Yeah, you keep your overheads really low. I know it's funny when I remember in the 90s, I remember reading an interview with Moby, and he was like, if I was a business manager, the advice I would give every artist is learn to DJ. Because it's the thing you can do with the lowest overhead.
Oh, I do all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I wanted to chat about Bandcamp, because you seem to, that's a distribution system that you seem to really stand behind. Like you believe in it. What's
especially now that Bandcamp Union has been recognized.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about Bandcamp. Well. Tell me about what first drew you to that, and what's the current state of it, and why is it so appealing?
Sure. I went over to Bandcamp from MySpace.com, as many of us did around the year 2008 or 9. It was just a great way to have your music available to purchase and to play without using CD Baby, which I think, did CD Baby just end? So let's see. Yeah, my bands were just always on Bandcamp from around that time. And when I started to do Speedy Ortiz, it was a total side project from my regular band. It was my solo thing where I had played all the instruments, and it was home recorded, very lo-fi. And I just put it up there in 2011, and immediately people liked it better than my previous band. And there was this cool community of people who were just scouring Bandcamp to find different artists. And certainly I was very interested in expanding my Bandcamp collection on my personal profile. And a great way to book tours at that time was just to search for the tags. Say you're trying to book Syracuse, then you look at all the bands who are in Syracuse, and you pick out an album. It's similar to browsing a record store. Pick out the album cover you like and check it out. And maybe that's not your thing, but the next thing is. And now you've got a friend in Syracuse, and you're going to play their basement. So in the way that the DIY forums and the phone book before that, Bandcamp became this great way to meet other like-minded artists around the country and trade shows with one another. So that was sort of how Speedy got its start. And then once we were on a label, one other utility we really liked on Bandcamp was that it's so easy to see what your sales are any particular day. You're not waiting the 3, 6, 12 months to see a royalty statement. You can see, oh, it's Bandcamp Friday. We made this much this day from this particular song. So around, I think in 2014 was the first time we did like a Bandcamp fundraiser. We were raising money for the Baltimore Food Bank. And it was just very easy to say, like, everything you buy this weekend digitally that we have, the things that we have the rights to pay out from, we're going to donate to this place. And we wound up continuing to do that over the years. A lot of artists do that. And Bandcamp has kind of, I don't think that was an initial goal of the organization, but with the Bandcamp Fridays and the Juneteenth fundraisers and a couple others that they do, I think they've realized that's a great utility of the platform, the sort of immediacy of sales numbers that can help artists forward it elsewhere if they so choose.
Awesome. And what happened recently? Were their workers unionized?
Yes. Yeah. Bandcamp Union. I know we were playing in Pittsburgh. So I have a couple of friends who have been part of the union organizing at Bandcamp, and it's been an ongoing project for many years. And we were playing in Pittsburgh last month, and they'd been recognized that day, and someone from the Bandcamp Union was there, and we were like, "You're a celebrity to us! Like, congratulations on
amazing."
So that I know the contract negotiations are ongoing, but hopefully great things for those workers who are the reason that Bandcamp is the thing that we love to use.
That is awesome. I guess we first met or started emailing after Adam Schlesinger died, our mutual friend.
Yeah, is that true? We must have met each other before that.
I feel like John Strom connected us. Or maybe we'd I don't know. I
feel like we were internet buddies.
Maybe, but I feel like that was when we really started chatting. But it was so amazing what you put together. You put together this incredible lineup of tribute of Adam Schlesinger's songs covered by all different people. And I guess I'm just, not every musician has the ability that you do. I think I have it too. The ability to have an idea and then take the action to do it. It's actually, it's very rare because it's not just, you don't just have to have the vision. You have to have like logistical skills. You have to be able to organize your day. You have to be not scared of dealing with people or with money or with,
Sure.
And again, maybe this comes back to, it's something I'm trying to reckon with in these conversations, which is artists like you and I might be outliers in the sense of self-determination we feel about choosing what we want to do and not want to do. Some artists are very fragile and they're very sensitive, and it's like, I think, very hard for them to tackle life and the industry head on. And I just wonder if you've worked with artists like that are not as outgoing and not as take life by the throat, and how you can support them in feeling empowered in the current climate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. Something that I think has been very helpful to me in knowing how to start and finish a project is I did all these random jobs for so many years. I have been working random jobs since I was 13 years old. And I think the more kinds of experience you pick up, the easier it becomes to envision how to tackle different kinds of projects. And I'm also, so the Adam Schlesinger project that we worked together on was a collaboration between Wax 9 and Father-Daughter Records, which is run by Jesse Frick. And Jesse and I have been friends for many years. I did a flexi disc for Father-Daughter's flexi disc postcard series maybe 10 years ago. But we'd never worked on a project together in a bigger scale than that. And something that has been like getting disappointed by people you work with is a really helpful learning tool for me. I think a lot of the skills that I have are because someone didn't quite get it right or someone kind of dropped the ball. And I'm like, I guess I better figure out how to fix this or pick up the slack. So in the pandemic, that I now know how to use every kind of pro editing software, unfortunately. Every time I learn a new thing, I'm like, God damn it, I didn't want to know more.
The cables. I never got into it to deal with this many cables.
Not even the cables. I'm like, why do I know how to edit a music video now? Why do I know how to animate in Photoshop? So we've had a couple rounds of managers in Speedy Ortiz, some better than others. Some I'm still really good friends with, even though it wasn't a good work fit. Some dropped the ball so drastically that we lost money, opportunities, all kinds of, they communicated unkindly on our behalf. So even that, which was a negative experience, taught me how to do it better. So I'm very good at self-managing and, learning different kinds of tasks or projects when I need to. And one thing I'll say, working on that project with Jesse, we wound up hiring Jesse to manage Speedy maybe like a year later, just because I know that our work styles are compatible. And when I can't figure something out, maybe that's something Jesse can do, or vice versa. So
appropriate delegation and outsourcing is always going to be part of the model of engaging with the business. You can't do everything yourself.
Sure. But I think also knowing how to do, like, even when I've delegated something to Jesse, I want to be on CC. I want to know how the sausage is getting made, and I want to be able to hop in and help in case, I'm not going to keep using this sausage metaphor. I just read Jamie Loftus's really good book, Raw Dog, which is about the history of the hot dog and all these regional political histories and like a labor history. It's really good, but hot dogs are on my mind. Anyway, read Raw Dog by Jamie Loftus. But I think a lot of artists who want to shy away from these kinds of things, that's totally valid. I think there's a part of me that also likes the adrenaline of like, oh shit, this has to get done in 5 days and whoever was hired dropped the ball. I guess I better learn.
Yeah, well, you have a producer quality, which I have too, which it's kind of a fun challenge to wrangle all the right parts into some kind of cohesive whole. It's a fun challenge, yeah.
And I'll say I also I didn't get diagnosed till like 4 years ago, but I have ADHD. And so I would never have been diagnosed with this as a child because I'm on the hyper-focus side of the spectrum.
And girls also apparently get diagnosed much less frequently.
Because it manifests differently depending on how you're socialized. And
you're not trying to light the school desk on fire. So
no, I'm trying to whatever to my
start a record label.
Academic path. Yeah. Have 400 kinds of jobs and work from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day.
Can I ask a question about balancing the artistic side with the business savvy or the activist side?
Yeah.
Something I struggle with. A lot of my peers, our peers, use Patreon, right? Or various other paywalled types of distribution systems. I spent an hour with Amanda Palmer on the phone once where she pitched me Patreon very convincingly to the point that I set up a profile. I never did anything with it.
Okay.
I struggle with, there's a part of me that believes being a musician is, it's got to be there for everybody. Like I want everything I do to, it's not that I believe everyone's going to hear it, but I believe everyone has to have the chance to have an accidental interaction with my work. Otherwise, if I remove that accidental interaction, I'm truly becoming an elitist in some sense. And I do believe I've always wanted to make work that was, I'm kind of a populist in the way I'm a mixture of an elitist and a populist, but I believe in gatekeeping my own work in the sense that I want smart, savvy people to have the opportunity to interact with it given the right circumstances. So I just struggle in general with this idea of paywalling my work. Because of the Patreon thing with podcasting, it's something I noticed.
Well, this is basically why I wanted our music to be able to be streamed on Bandcamp 10 years ago, because it didn't sit right to me that you should be paying a third party a subscription service to decide whether to, the goal of Spotify when it first crawled around was people will listen to this and buy the record. It will increase your record sales. I don't always know that that's true. And why should the paywall exist for someone to decide to purchase the physical media? So I'm similar to you. I did do a Bandcamp subscription during the pandemic because there were a bunch of, everyone was just trying everything because suddenly the touring income was cut off. And
it's fair too. Like whatever my personal feelings are, I have no judgment on any. If you can survive in the music business, I honor you.
Yeah, similar. I haven't really engaged with Patreon. I mean, I have I've published books. They're not available for free as digital copies. So I think it kind of depends on the kind of media you're engaging with and who you're releasing it with, whether you can make that call to have your work distributed for free. But certainly I support the library model and wish that more digital media could fall under that category where folks are able to get records from their public library as they are able to get my book, for example. Or
did you grow up with movies? That? Because I borrowed cassettes.
They did have CDs at the library for sure, but it hasn't really, with the exception of a few libraries, streaming has not really entered that system, which I think would be incredible.
Totally. Do you have, I mean, we're in an unknown precipice of this, but I'm curious, just talking to musicians, about your feelings, concerns, inspirations around AI and that conversation. Is there going to be a Speedy record that someone else programs and that you license your voice and likeness to? And, there's all these possibilities coming. Would you let a fan create something that sounds like it's using your voice and you singing it? Would you be interested in that? Okay.
To you?
It's worth talking about. I'd be interested. If it was a smart person who had an actual idea and approached me and said, I'll cut
why
you in
can't
on
they
this,
just hire you to sing the song?
Why can't they hire me to sing the song?
Why can't the human just do the project? You're here. You're alive. You've got at least an hour of time to be on a microphone.
I'm available. Yeah, I'm available. But what about what if I wrote a song that I was like, God, this song, Johnny Cash would have sung this amazingly. I want to create the sound of, I want to release a new Johnny Cash.
Legacy is so stressful to me.
That's what I want to hear about that. This whole thing is like stressful to all of us. So we got to talk about it.
It completely eliminates the consent of the artist to be involved or to have their likeness distributed and profited off of.
Well, it eliminates that for artists up until now. But I think these are things that as we leave behind, like I've always said to my daughter, whatever my catalog is worth, I'm leaving that to you. You got to manage that. You got to hopefully create some income for that for yourself and your kids. But
there's no way we can barely keep the royalties of our songs in our hands while we are alive and able to fight over it and pick it outside of Spotify's offices. What makes you think that
licensing? I've done pretty well with licensing for commercials. I could foresee a situation where
I just don't think the AI would stay in people's hands. I mean, look at how these are all trained, right? So my feelings about AI are admittedly very influenced by my friends who are illustrators, cartoonists, any kind of graphic artists, because I feel like the first Chat GPT thing that came out was these, what is it called? It had some funny name. The illustration thing. Dolly, yeah. And so it comes out that Dolly's just been, Dolly, first of all, was producing a lot of racist things, which is troubling, but it's also trained on artists' work, and they're not compensated for their work being fed into that machine to train a robot to poorly replace them. But that's the end goal, right? That major corporations don't have to pay the artists to illustrate that Coca-Cola billboard. Now that the ChatGPT in the writing realm is infiltrating newsrooms, it's infiltrating all kinds of writing. We have writers on strike on both coasts every day picketing because they're not being compensated fairly. And this is a way to replace people's labor that is skilled. And I just don't see a good outcome in having more control clawed away from artists so that a free robot can replace them and do like a hack job of it.
It's fair enough. So remember, like when Adam Yauch died from the Beastie Boys, he set in his will that he, for all future cases, does not approve the use of any Beastie Boys song in any commercial, anything. He set up a very challenging predicament for a band with 2 living members that continue in a changing ecosystem. But I wonder if we'll have to, if we feel the same way when we're, on our deathbeds, if we'll have to leave some kind of instruction that our image and our likeness and our voice are not to be used in some way like that. I think it's going to become more and more normal.
To. I don't think I have to worry about that, but
you never know. You never know.
Only Subaru commercials. Just kidding.
So yeah, are there any other areas of concern for musicians thinking ahead of what does my future look like besides these sort of core issues I've been touching on? I wonder from your perspective, I think because I had someone write to me about accessibility.
Yeah.
I know you've been involved in conversations around safe spaces, for audiences. I don't know. I'm just curious from your perspective, what else is sort of concerning you about?
Yeah, for sure. The accessibility of venues is a major conversation and something that a lot of folks who are not me have done really good work to try to change. There's that Is This Venues Accessible database that basically lists any potential accessibility concerns of venues. A lot of venues have been asked to list their accessibility restrictions and are complying with this, which is crucial because if someone gets to a venue and finds they have to walk up 2 flights of stairs, that can be the difference of them using their ticket that night or not. I think live streaming certainly entered the conversation of accessibility in that many people are not able to go to concert venues, but still would like to see the performance. So I know post-pandemic, some venues have continued to offer a way to stream the concert for people at home, which is really cool. Something that I got interested in however many years ago was safer spaces, and this partially inspired by just playing places that had them clearly and prominently displayed. The Pinhook is always an example that I love to shout out. Really great venue in Durham. A lot of the DIY clubs around New York were including safer spaces policies.
Can you go into that just for a little bit? Because I'm not.
What does it mean?
Exactly what the policies are.
It basically can speak to what kinds of, that language, certain kinds of language and harassment will not be tolerated at the venue. What to do if
by
you see
artists
it happening.
Or audience, by either.
Yeah, it's it's an agreement between people working the venue, people attending the show, and the artists. And in some cases so we were able to work with JJ Skolnick, who's another organizer at Bandcamp, prior to their work at Bandcamp, was doing trainings in de-escalation. And this basically teaches you how to intervene and to help someone out if you see them experiencing harassment or something else at a show. So we started to distro information about de-escalation. We started to distro Shauna Potter's book, which is called Making Spaces Safer. And it includes a lot of information for how venues can make policy changes or staffing changes or structural changes to make their concert venues more inclusive and accessible. And we actually still give that out on tour. We bought a bunch of, there's 2 versions of the book. One's a longer one, and the smaller one's more of a chat book. It's like
I'm going to order that. That's cool.
It's really cool. Yeah. So we give that out to promoters and day of show contacts when we're on tour. I've seen a lot more venues posting their safer spaces policies over the past, 8 years. It was not something we saw very frequently when we first started doing this kind of work, where we, put into our rider, hate speech is not tolerated, racism is not tolerated, harassment is not tolerated. Here's how to de-escalate when you see this happening. And something that we did around that time too was started a hotline that people could text if they were experiencing harassment at a show. The idea being that we could help them get backstage or get to a safe space. We kind of have shifted away from, it's still up and operational. But I think the thing that has been that we've felt is more effective is helping the venues to learn how to set things up like this for themselves. And I have seen a lot more venues with these policies posted, or with a phone number that someone can reach out to if they're experiencing a problem at a show. I feel like it's more sensical for someone who goes to Bowery Ballroom all the time to just have Bowery Ballroom text hotline in their phone than like, Speedy Ortiz is here every year and a half. Let me see if I can dig their number up from 2015.
That de-escalation stuff is so crucial. There's actually, River Phoenix's mom, Hart Phoenix, started the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building.
Oh, wow.
And it's a whole, it kind of went, the conversation around peace building sort of went hand in hand with the conversation about defunding the police. Because it was about going in and training both police departments, but also security and people like that on conflict resolution in nonviolent ways. And it's so important. Yeah.
And this is part of why we included our number that forwards to our touring party when we started doing this, because so frequently when there had been an issue at a venue, talking to security would not help or would escalate things, because security had not been trained in, it's the hired agency for the night, and they don't know anything about the clientele or what might make the situation worse. Yeah.
It's like private security, private army.
And so kind of growing out of that, recognizing, that making resources available to venues and to concert goers was something that could make our shows, or maybe other people's shows who saw us doing this, a better place to be and a safer place to be. We started to work with different harm reduction organizations as well on tour. So this is something that, when you say what's the thing that's really important, this has been the main thing that has been really important to me in the past few years, because I've lost so many friends to overdose, to opioid overdose, and this is a preventable death if you have the right supplies and training on hand. And people use drugs in every corner of work and entertainment and, in your communities. But as a musician, that feels like a space where I can help prevent death in my community. So we've started to have different groups, or we are able to do it ourselves depending on where we are, distribute Narcan or naloxone, which is the same medication, just nose spray or injectable. And all this medication can do is prevent an overdose that's occurring. So we've had,
So wait, you're distributing that to venues that you're going to go and play at?
We do it at the shows. So if people want to come up to the merch table, they're able to pick up Narcan, the nasal version, or the intramuscular naloxone, depending on where it is. And we don't always get to do this. It basically depends on whether there is a local group that's able to work with us.
So your merch
whether
person
the laws,
is not dependent. They're not the one that has to be like teaching people how to administer it or something if they come up to the merch.
that who's not teaching
your
people?
merch, the person that you're doing your merch.
The person doing the merch, it's like me or someone else in the band. It's really easy to use these medications, and there's video of how to distribute it.
That's amazing.
And then so Narcan now is available everywhere by federal order, only as of like a month ago. It used to be that depending on what state you were in, you couldn't have it. Thank God that's not the case anymore, because we lose so many people to overdose every day. Again, it's preventable. All this medication can do is reverse overdose. But there's other things that are still question marks in the harm reduction policy world. Like, you can test for fentanyl with test strips. And in some states, we can give that out. In some states, that's illegal. Why would that be illegal? All it can do is test for a substance that could kill you. We still have a lot of pretty archaic and corporal drug laws that just don't help keep people alive. So we're definitely grateful to get to work with these different harm reduction groups. There's a new one called This Must Be the Place, and they've been distroing at major music festivals. I know they did Bonnaroo last summer. They probably are doing it this summer. And they just give out Narcan to people who are at a festival and might encounter someone experiencing an overdose and save their life. That's so powerful. And just being able to have those conversations within music communities that aren't based around shame or like, that abstinence is the only way. I think the only way that we keep people with us is to understand that people use drugs and need resources, public health resources. So definitely have been very grateful to get to work with people doing that really important work. And yeah.
That's amazing. You're incredible. That's incredible. That's so much good. I'm so
You could
excited.
do it. If you want to know some groups that might table for you, let me know.
Well, you know what? I'd also just love in general, whether it's them or there's anyone else that lights you up about, leading the way forward. I definitely love, some tips. I'm building a little list.
Yeah. I mean, This Must Be the Place is the one I'd shout out first and foremost. There's different groups, different places. Some are more above ground than others. Some are like anonymous street medics who are doing just as crucial work and reaching just as many, if not many more people in terms of how much naloxone they're able to distribute. But
so This Must Be the Place they're
specifically focused on
agency, sort of it's a nonprofit.
Yeah, an organization, and they're specifically focused on music and live music.
That's amazing. Awesome.
Getting these materials into festivals where a lot of people are using drugs and like having a good time and don't deserve to have those resources denied them.
Lastly, before we go, tell us a little bit about this incredible new record that's coming out.
Oh,
it's pretty soon, right? When's your album coming out?
It'll be out in September.
That's all right. Good build up. Drip those singles.
A couple weeks ago.
So you did this one with Sarah Tudson, right?
Yep.
Illuminati Hotties, mutual friend of ours.
Yes.
Excellent producer too.
Yeah, she's great.
And you did it out in the desert?
Mm-hmm. We did it. We did basic tracking at Rancho de la Luna in Joshua Tree, a studio I've long been very curious about. And Matt Sweeney told me that every band should do one record there. I was like, well,
hey, if Matt Sweeney says it, you got to do it.
Yeah. Yep. So we went, and David Catching, who runs the studio, was there for the whole session, as he is for every session there. And especially, we tracked this, I guess it was March of last year. None of us had been on a plane. Last year. None of us had been on a plane since the pandemic. We really hadn't even spent unmasked time together since the pandemic, other than, rehearsals that we test for COVID and did everything as COVID safe as possible. So it was just like amazing to not only get to have this experience with all my bandmates who are my best friends, to get to go to this beautiful place, but also to meet David, who's just such a lovely, inspiring, brilliant person. And then to have Sarah with us, another one of my best buds. So it was really cool to get to do it there after so much time not together and not going anywhere. And
And what are the songs? I hate the term about, but like, what's this project? What's the vibe of this, aside from where the specialness of where it was recorded?
Sure.
Or the aesthetic, or,
I mean, there's certainly some songs where I joke that I'm like on my Hold Caulfield bullshit. There's some songs that are specifically about striking workers and union busting companies, things that made me very angry to watch in the early days of the pandemic and prior to that. So the couple singles that have been out so far, the first one is called Scabs, and that was written about just overhearing people in the post office being uncool to a mail worker. And this was like right in the middle of pretty widely reported and postal union opposed budgetary cuts and changes to staffing and hours and all kinds of things that just made like mail work more untenable than it already has been. So I kind of wrote it first about that, but then it became more widely about people who are happy to cross a picket line for personal convenience, despite being vocally yard signy. So then, and that does sort of tie to some of the other themes of the record. Like some of them are, of course, about the outrage at climate injustice, at labor injustice, at all the things that make me furious on a day-to-day basis. But like so many people in the pandemic, I had to reckon with parts of my past that I've just been completely avoiding due to being on tour 10 months of the year. I interview artists for different publications, but I also write a lot of artist bios. So I get the behind the scenes stuff that maybe doesn't make it to the press release. And it was wild to hear how many people were reckoning with their own childhood trauma for the first time, figuring out what makes them, why they have these specific kinds of anger responses. And that was one of the things that was really, this is the hardest record I've had to write because I was going back to childhood trauma and abuse that I had dealt with as a child that I had not ever wanted to talk about or ever wanted to write about, and was content to just work, not deal. So I was writing through some of that for the first time. And I feel really thankful that I have such great like bandmates and friends like Sarah Tudson, people that I was kind of able to work through this material for the first time, not material, work through these memories for the first time in a musical format.
That's amazing.